It was supposed to be a quick summer adventure. One night beneath the stars, a break from the noise of everyday life. For David and Holly Cowsert, it was a family tradition. Pack the tent, grab the kids, and head into the Utah hills where the air smells like pine and dust. A simple overnight hike in Perry Canyon, nothing more. But by sunset that Monday, July 1st, 2013, the wind had shifted. Smoke began to creep along the ridges. And by the next morning, no one could reach them. Phones went unanswered. Their truck sat untouched at the reservoir. The wildfire was closing in. And somewhere in the canyon, a family of 5 had vanished. The Cowserts weren't strangers to the outdoors. They lived near Perry, a small community on the slopes of Utah's Box Elder County, and they knew the canyons well. That Monday morning, the family, David, Holly, and their 3 children, Mandy, Polo, and Nate, all between 11 and 13, set out for a short hike and camping trip. Their plan was simple. Hike up from Perry Reservoir, make camp near a ridge called Inspiration Point, and be home by Tuesday afternoon. It was meant to be the kind of trip that fills a photo album. Clear skies, roasting marshmallows, and watching fireflies from a tent flap. The weather, however, had other plans. Utah was in the middle of a hot, dry summer, and several wildfires were already burning across the state. One of them, a brush fire southeast of Perry, had been contained over the weekend, but embers still smoldered in the canyon's underbrush. Authorities weren't overly concerned. It was small, low risk, but anyone who's lived in the high desert knows how fast contained can become out of control. The Cowserts parked their vehicle near the reservoir and started their climb. They were last seen around midday, spotted by a fisherman who waved them as they followed the trail into the upper canyon. By all accounts, they looked calm and confident. Then, as the sun began to set behind the Wasatch Range, they disappeared into thickening haze. When Tuesday came and went with no word, relatives grew uneasy. Holly's mother tried calling, but no one picked up. By evening, the family still hadn't returned, and the wildfire, now reignited by shifting winds, had begun spreading toward Perry Canyon. At 8:32 p.m., the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office logged an emergency call. Family of 5 overdue from camping trip, possible in wildfire area. Search and rescue volunteers gathered near the base of the canyon. Pickup trucks lined the dirt road, headlights cutting through dust and smoke. They spread topographic maps over the hood of a sheriff's SUV. Red markers of fire line, blue for potential search grids. A helicopter was requested from the Utah Department of Public Safety, DPS. But flying conditions were poor. Smoke had swallowed the ridges, and winds were unpredictable. Ground crews began hiking in at dawn. The temperature was already climbing past 90 degrees, and ash fell like gray snow across their shoulders. Every few minutes, someone called out the family's names into canyon, but the sound bounced off rock and vanished into the air. That night, the search grew tense. Volunteers described eerie quiet. No birds, no wind, just a low hum of fire far away. A few rescuers reported hearing faint voices, but none could confirm direction. Visibility dropped to near zero as the smoke thickened. Still, they pressed on. Meanwhile, at home, relatives waited for updates. Television stations picked up the story. Family missing near Utah wildfire. Search crews mobilized in Box Elder County. In the absence of facts, rumors spread. Had they wandered too close to the fire? Had they started it accidentally, trying to signal for help? No one knew. Even seasoned rescuers admitted privately that the canyon felt off, too still, too quiet, as if holding its breath. At first light on Wednesday, July 3rd, the DPS helicopter returned to the air. From above, Perry Canyon looked like another world. A mosaic of green slopes, blackened earth, and thin threads of smoke curling from the trees. The pilots used infrared cameras to scan for heat signatures that didn't match the burn pattern. Hours passed. Nothing. Then, just before 11:30 a.m., one of the operators spotted something, a small flash of color against the gray rock, near a formation called London Spire, roughly 10 miles north of the wildfire's edge. Ground crews redirected. When they reached the site, they found the Cowsert family huddled near the entrance of a shallow cave, exhausted but alive. They had run low on food and water, but avoided the fire entirely. David told rescuers they had lost their bearings after sunset and decided to shelter until daylight. It was the right call. Had they tried to hike out in darkness, they might have stumbled into a sheer drop or deeper terrain. The radio crackled through the canyon. "We've located all 5, alive and in good condition." Cheers erupted from the base camp. What began as a story of dread, of a family swallowed by fire, ended in relief and disbelief. They had survived 2 nights in the canyon, with little more than their gear, instinct, and luck. Back in Perry, word spread fast. Neighbors cried. Reporters swarmed the sheriff's office. And for the first time in 2 days, the smoke on the horizon didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an ending. Officials later confirmed that the family had never been in immediate danger from the wildfire. They had simply strayed far off the intended trail and lost their route back down. Still, the incident left a mark. For days afterward, searchers said the canyon felt different, like the land itself had been holding its breath until the family was found. A reminder of how quickly familiarity can turn to isolation, and how close the line always is between lost and found. Morning came with the low hum of helicopters in the distance, the kind that vibrate in your chest before you can even hear them. It was July 2nd, 2013, and Box Elder County, Utah, was already choking on smoke. Overnight, what began as a manageable brush fire near Perry Canyon had evolved into a full-fledged wildfire, the kind that eats through sagebrush and cedar like paper. By mid-morning, the sheriff's office started getting calls. First from a worried relative, then another. The Cowsert family hadn't come home. David and Holly, along with their 3 children, ages 5, 8, and 11, had gone hiking the day before, planned to camp for just 1 night. They'd told relatives they would be back by morning. But now, their truck sat untouched at the Perry Reservoir trailhead. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced. "When did you last hear from them?" "Yesterday afternoon," came the reply. They said they could see smoke in the distance, but they weren't worried. By that point, the smoke wasn't in the distance anymore. Winds had shifted. The fire had jumped a ridge overnight, growing to nearly 300 acres. The canyon was now filled with ash and haze, visibility dropping by the hour. Within minutes, the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office activated search and rescue. Local firefighters were already battling the blaze, their trucks rumbling up canyon roads, water tanks sloshing. But a search for missing hikers near a wildfire zone, that was something else entirely, a logistical nightmare. "Every move we make has to go through fire command," a crew member recalled later. "You can't just send people into smoke like that. You'll end up with 6 missing instead of 5. Helicopter teams were ordered to scan the area from above, though thick smoke made spotting anything almost impossible. On the ground, volunteers and deputies began scouring nearby trails, shouting into the wind, hoping for any sound in return. The early assumption was simple. The family had likely taken the wrong trail, lost track of time, or hiked deeper into the canyon as conditions worsened. But by mid-afternoon, fear started to settle in. What if they'd wandered into the path of the wildfire? At 3:40 p.m., fire crews reported flames cresting another ridge, only 2 miles from the search zone. Search teams had to pull back. The canyon was now closed off from the main road, the smell of charred brush thick in the air. Reporters began gathering near the command post, a small staging area off Perry Canyon Road. Officials gave brief updates, careful not to use the word missing too early. "We're searching for a family of 5 overdue from a hike," one officer said. "There is a wildfire in the vicinity, and that's complicating our efforts." For the next 24 hours, the mountain turned into a maze of smoke, heat, and radio chatter. Helicopters circled, sometimes forced a retreat when gusts of wind stirred the fire's direction. Deputies worked through the night, navigating terrain where GPS signals flickered in and out. They were exhausted, faces streaked with soot, but no one wanted to leave until there was an answer. Relatives arrived at the scene, tearful, anxious, trying to stay hopeful. "They know that area," one said. "David grew up hiking those trails. He's careful. He wouldn't take chances with the kids." But nature doesn't care about experience. Perry Canyon, known for its winding trails and sandstone caves, becomes disorienting once smoke rolls in. The air grows metallic, sounds warp, It's the kind of place where you can be 30 feet from someone and not see them. Around dusk, as the last daylight bled to the haze, firefighters spotted something unusual near a bend in the trail, a set of small footprints in the ash, leading downhill. Fresh, too small to belong to an adult. Teams followed the prints until they faded into a dry creek bed. Nothing else. No tent, no supplies, no movement. That night, the canyon glowed orange against the horizon. The Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands expanded the fire perimeter, and all non-essential personnel were ordered out. Search efforts would resume at first light, when helicopters could fly again. Inside the temporary command trailer, Sheriff Lynn Yates briefed the team. "We're treating this as a rescue," he said firmly. "We have reason to believe they're taking shelter somewhere nearby." He pointed at a shaded area marked on the map, a stretch of rocky overhangs and shallow caves about 3 miles from where the truck was found. It was a small window of hope. Interviews later revealed that crews debated how far the family could have gone on foot, especially with 3 children in tow. They were experienced, one rescuer noted, but conditions up there change in an instant. One wrong turn, one gust of wind, and you can lose all sense of direction. Overnight, the canyon roared with the sounds of the fire. Trees collapsing, ash falling like snow, and the faint hum of aircraft keeping vigil above the darkness. Somewhere in that wilderness, amid fire and silence, a family was waiting, or worse, already gone. To those who were there, it felt less like a search and more like a race against time, a desperate attempt to find life before the canyon consumed any trace of it. The line between rescue and recovery was growing thinner by the hour. The sun fell behind the canyon wall, faster than they expected. One moment the air was gold and dusted with light. The next, it was dim, the temperature sinking like a stone. David Cowsert checked his phone. No signal. Not that it mattered. The battery was nearly dead anyway. Holly scanned the ridge for the return trail they had taken the day before, but the smoke from the wildfire had rolled in thicker now, blurring everything into shades of gray. The kids were tired, hungry, their clothes streaked with dirt and ash. What was supposed to be a short hike and overnight camp had stretched into something else entirely. They'd followed what they believed was a loop back toward Perry Reservoir, but the trail forked and vanished into dry brush. The heat from the day lingered in the rocks, and with the wildfire somewhere nearby, the wind carried a faint hiss, that eerie, constant sound of burning from miles away. When the first embers drifted into the air, they realized how close the fire must have come. "We're going to head down," David said calmly. "Lower ground. There's got to be water or cover down there." He was trying to sound steady for the kids, but Holly could tell he was watching the wind direction more than the path. They moved quickly, following a narrow ravine that curved along the canyon's edge. The smoke thickened and the landscape turned strange. Landmarks vanished, replaced by the same repeating pattern of rock and cedar. Even the compass flickered uncertainly, the needle swaying back and forth, disoriented by mineral-rich stone or the storm of static in the air. By dusk, visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. The canyon was a maze of shadows now. The youngest child began coughing, not violently, but enough to make Holly's chest tighten. Smoke inhalation, she thought. It wasn't heavy yet, but it could get worse fast. David spotted a dark shape in the cliffside, a hollow, wide enough for them to crawl inside. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. A shallow cave tucked into the rock near what hikers later identified as London Spire, a sandstone formation not far from the canyon's midsection. Inside it was cooler, the air faintly damp, smelling of earth and lichen. They settled there for the night. The fire was distant but visible, a faint orange glow licking at the ridgeline miles away. The silence in between gusts of wind was surreal, almost unnerving. David divided what little they had left. A few granola bars, a bottle and a half of water. "Small sips," he told them. "We'll make it out in the morning." Holly wrapped the kids in a tarp and a thin blanket, pressing them close for warmth as the desert temperature plunged into the 40s. Every few minutes, they'd hear something, a crack of rock, a rush of air, and freeze. It could have been wind or falling branches, or the distant movement of wildlife escaping the fire. In the darkness, imagination fills in what eyes can't see. Around midnight, faint sound began echoing across the canyon. the thump of helicopter rotors overhead. Rescue crews. Holly leapt up and waved a flashlight through the cave entrance, but the beam was weak and the smoke was thick. Their shouts vanished into the air before reaching the treetops. From above, no one could see them. That's the cruel paradox of wilderness rescues. Sometimes you could be less than a mile from help and still completely invisible. By dawn, the smoke had cleared just enough to let in a pale gray light. The youngest child's cough had worsened, dry and shallow. Their water was nearly gone. David pressed a hand to a rock wall, trying to gauge the heat. It was warm but not burning. The fire must have moved downslope. They were safe for now. They decided to stay put rather than risk walking deeper into the canyon. The logic was simple. You're easier to find if you stop moving. That's what survival guides teach. But it's a rule that's far harder to follow when you're cold, thirsty, and can hear helicopters fading in and out overhead. Hours passed. Then faint voices, distant but distinct. David climbed out the cave entrance and started shouting until his throat burned. "We're here! We're here!" Nothing at first. Then a reply, muffled but real. "Stay where you are. Don't move." It took rescuers another hour to reach them. The terrain was brutal. Narrow slopes, crumbling rock, deadfall from previous fires. But by mid-morning on July 3rd, 2013, search crews located the family exactly where Sheriff Lynn Yates had predicted, sheltered in a small cave above Perry Canyon. They were dehydrated and shaken, but alive. The youngest child was treated for mild smoke inhalation on site. The relief that swept through the command post was immediate and overwhelming. For nearly 30 hours, authorities had feared the worst, that the family had been trapped by the fire or overcome by smoke. Instead, they had survived by instinct composure and the simple decision to stop running from the mountain and wait for it to calm. That night, back in town, firefighters continued their battle with the wildfire, but the headlines were already spreading. Missing Utah family found safe near wildfire, sheltered in Canyon Cave. The contrast was striking. Flames still burning in the hills, while just miles away, a small family sat safe at home, watching it all on the evening news. And for the rescuers who combed the smoke in silence for 2 relentless days, one thought lingered long after the fire was contained. The forest doesn't hunt, but it doesn't save either. The command post at the mouth of Perry Canyon looked like something out of a wildfire war zone. Tents, radio towers, emergency vehicles coated in ash. A line of yellow-helmeted firefighters moved like silhouettes against the smoke, and the air hung heavy with the smell of burning cedar. By the morning of July 3rd, 2013, the search had entered its second full day. The wildfire, now hundreds of acres wide, was still active to the south. Every gust of wind could change the plan. Box Elder County Search and Rescue Unit worked side by side with Fire Command and the Utah Department of Public Safety, DPS, helicopter crew. Their coordination had to be exact. One wrong flight path and a helicopter could be caught in a heat updraft or a sudden wind shift. From above, the canyon looked deceptively calm, vast, smoky ridges with only faint trails cutting through them. But on the ground, rescuers described it as like walking through fog that burns your throat. Every few minutes, a voice crackled over the radio. Unit 3 to command, negative contact. Moving east toward the creek bed. Dozens of volunteers, locals, off-duty deputies, hikers who knew the terrain, had joined the effort. They fanned out along creeks and ridgelines, calling names into the void. David, Holly, kids. The words disappeared almost instantly, swallowed by the canyon's acoustics. The wind shifted again. Smoke blew down the slope, forcing several teams to pull back. Visibility 0. One rescue reported, "We can't see more than 20 feet ahead." The tension was rising not just in the canyon, but back in town. By now, word of the missing family had spread through Perry and neighboring Brigham City. At gas stations and diners, speculation ran wild. Did they start the fire? One man asked a local reporter. Or were they caught up in it? Officials shut that down fast. There was no evidence linking the family to the wildfire. But rumors are like sparks. They spread faster than truth. At base camp, the Cowsert's relatives huddled together near the staging area, watching the orange haze creep across the horizon. They'd been told to expect updates every hour, but hours felt like lifetimes. The heat radiating from the fire made even standing still unbearable. Bottles of water lined the tables. Radios buzzed nonstop, and everyone jumped whenever static gave way to a voice. One firefighter leaned on the tailgate of a truck, wiping soot from his face. "If they went up canyon instead of down," he muttered, "we might never find them." That was the fear. Up canyon meant steep, unstable ground, cliffs and loose shale that even experienced hikers avoided. It also meant fewer escape routes if the fire changed direction. From his position at command, Sheriff Lynn Yates studied a topographical map spread across a folding table. His finger traced the contour lines leading toward a narrow section near London Spire. "If they saw smoke, they might have gone there for cover," he said. "It's the only rock formation that offers shelter for miles." That hypothesis became the new focus. Around mid-morning, a DPS helicopter lifted off again, despite worsening wind. The pilot, trained for wildfire operations, maneuvered through air thick with ash, scanning the ridges for movement. Down below, searchers trudged through charred underbrush, the ground soft and unstable underfoot. Every step kicked up clouds of black dust that stuck to their boots and masks. Radios crackled intermittently, static, then voices, then silence. At one point, a team found what looked like footprints near a wash, small, light impressions in the soot. The discovery reignited hope. "We got tracks heading north," the call came in. "Looks like more than one set. Could be them." Command ordered everyone to converge. But just as quickly, the wind shifted again, forcing the helicopter to retreat. Ash and debris rained down from above. In the chaos of coordination, maps, GPS points, smoke reports, it was easy to forget that the rescuers were risking their lives, too. They were operating in heat that could rise past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, breathing air thick with particulates. One firefighter described the atmosphere later. "You could taste the metal in your mouth. The smoke wasn't just around you, it was you. It got in your hair, your clothes, your lungs." Still, they pressed forward. No one was ready to stop searching. By early afternoon, Base Command received a visual from a firefighter on the western ridge. A flicker of movement inside a shaded rock outcrop. It was brief, a flashlight beam or maybe a reflection, but it was enough to call in coordinates. Possible visual, North Slope Grid 12C. The helicopter pilot banked hard to the east and hovered low, using hand signals to guide a ground team up the slope. Rescuers climbed through brush and scree, shouting as they went. And then, over the radio, the words everyone had been waiting for. "We have them. We found the family." The entire command post went silent for a moment, as if everyone had stopped breathing. Then came the wave of relief. They were alive, all 5 of them. When the rescue crew reached the cave, the family was huddled together, pale, dehydrated, and covered in soot, but unharmed. The youngest child had a faint wheeze, likely from smoke exposure, and was given oxygen immediately. The Cowserts had spent nearly 2 days trapped in the canyon, surviving on rationed food and minimal water. They had stayed calm, stayed together, and waited for help. As the helicopter lifted them out one by one, the mood at base camp shifted from dread to quiet disbelief. Firefighters who had been bracing for tragedy stood in stunned relief. That night, the flames were still burning over Perry Canyon, but for the first time in 2 days, the radio chatter turned soft. Routine updates instead of frantic calls. The mountain had given back what it took, and for those who had searched the smoke in silence, the moment felt almost sacred. Proof that sometimes, against the odds, hope can outlast even fire. At first light on July 3rd, 2013, the canyon looked like a landscape from another planet. Smoke hung low over the valley floor, and the light filtering through it turned everything the color of rust. For nearly 2 days, search crews had combed this wilderness, calling names into silence, following faint footprints, chasing hope through smoke and exhaustion. Now, with visibility finally improving, the Utah Department of Public Safety helicopter made one more sweep. The pilot, trained to fly in wildfire zones, moved slow and steady, scanning the cliffside with sharp eyes. Then, a flicker of color. Amid the gray and ochre rock, something bright caught the light. A scrap of blue, almost invisible unless the sun hit it at the right angle. The pilot circled back. "Hold on," he radioed. "Possible visual. Copy my coordinates." Down below, search and rescue teams waited for confirmation. Every lead over the last 36 hours had ended in disappointment. False trails, animal prints, abandoned fire gear. But this one felt different. "Command, this is Air Unit 1, the pilot said, voice tight with focus. "We've got movement. Looks like 5 individuals near a rock formation, possibly a cave entrance. Repeat, 5 individuals stationary, waving." The canyon erupted in noise. Radios crackled. Boots hit gravel. Teams scrambled to recheck the coordinates. The site was steep, a rocky slope just below London Spire, where the terrain tilted sharply toward the creek bed. Getting there would mean climbing through loose scree and brittle sandstone. Still, they didn't hesitate. A 4-person team started the ascent. Each rescuer carried a pack: first aid gear, oxygen tanks, and water. The higher they climbed, the hotter the air became, thick with the scent of scorched sage. "Visual on the cave," one rescuer said breathlessly into his radio. "We're about 50 yards out." Then came the moment that everyone had been praying for. There they were. The Cowsert family, David, Holly, and their 3 children, huddled near the entrance of a shallow cave. Their faces were streaked with soot. Their lips were dry and cracked. But they were alive. The rescuers moved fast but gentle. "You're safe now," one said, handing over water bottles. The kids drank slowly, one sip at a time. David's voice was hoarse. "We tried to signal last night," he said. "We saw the helicopters, but the smoke was too thick." The youngest child coughed, shallow, dry, the result of breathing smoke for too long. A rescuer pressed a small oxygen mask to his face. "Easy now. Deep breaths." Meanwhile, the radio went wild with static and celebration. "Command, this is Ground Team Delta." "Go ahead, Delta." "We've got him, all 5, alive and well." A pause, then cheers on the other end. Even hardened firefighters at the base camp, men and women who'd spent years battling disasters, stopped what they were doing and let out a sigh of relief. From the air, the DPS helicopter lowered through a cloud of ash, rotor blades whipping smoke and dust into a storm. The crew dropped a sling line for extraction. Each family member was secured in a harness and lifted one by one, spinning slowly through the haze toward the open sky. When Holly's feet left the ground, she looked down at the canyon, the same place that had nearly become their grave, now filled with the sound of rescue. The helicopter blades cut through the silence like thunder. Below, the rescuers shielded their eyes from the rotor wash, watching the family disappear into the gray morning. The last to go was David. He shook hands with the lead rescuer before stepping into the sling. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. Within minutes, the helicopter banked toward the valley, the figures inside barely visible against the smoke. The crew radioed once more before vanishing behind the ridge. Family secured, returning to base. At the command post, families and reporters waited in tense anticipation. The moment the helicopter appeared overhead, a cheer went up. A few firefighters clapped each other on the shoulders. Someone whispered, "They made it." The Cowserts were examined on site by paramedics, dehydrated, sunburned, shaken, but otherwise unharmed. The youngest child was given additional oxygen and cleared by medical staff shortly after. Sheriff Lynn Yates, who had been coordinating the operation from the start, stepped up to the microphones that afternoon. His face was lined with exhaustion, but he smiled for the first time in days. "They did everything right," he said. "They stayed calm, they stayed together, and they waited for help. That's what saved their lives." When asked about the fire, Yates explained that the blaze never reached the family's location, but the smoke and terrain made visibility nearly impossible. "They were just 3 miles from where we started searching," he said. 3 miles and completely hidden. As evening fell, the wind finally began to die down. The sky turned to muted gold, and for the first time in days, the canyon looked peaceful again. At the base camp, rescuers began packing up equipment. Coiled ropes, empty water tanks, radios now silent. The tension that had gripped the mountain for 2 straight days was replaced by something quieter, gratitude. The canyon, for all its danger, had given them back alive. Later that night, as news stations across Utah ran the headline, "Missing family found safe near wildfire," the footage played on repeat. The helicopter hovering above gray stone, the figures waving weakly from below, the orange glow of the fire smoldering on the horizon. It looked cinematic, unreal even. But for those who'd been there, the emotion was raw, unfiltered. They hadn't just watched a rescue. They'd witnessed a family come back from the edge. And in the hush that followed, as the helicopters disappeared into dusk, one rescuer quietly summed it up better than anyone else could. That canyon was ready to swallow them, but somehow it didn't. By the morning of July 4th, 2013, Perry Canyon was quiet again. The air still carried the faint, bitter scent of ash, but the roar of helicopters had faded. The search tents of the trailhead were being packed away, and the last of the volunteers trudged down from the ridge, exhausted, blistered, but relieved. The Cowsert family was safe. News of their survival spread faster than the wildfire itself. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Missing Utah family found alive near wildfire. Television vans rolled into the small community. Reporters leaned over barricades, microphones outstretched, hoping to capture the soundbite everyone wanted. How did they make it out? When David and Holly Cowsert finally appeared outside their home in Box Elder County, they didn't look like the kind of people who just made national news. Their faces were sunburned, their clothes hung loose, but their voices were steady. "We thought we knew those hills," David said quietly. His wife nodded beside him, holding their youngest daughter's hand. It all happened so fast. One turn off the trail, then smoke, and it felt like the whole world disappeared. Officials from the Box Elder County Sheriff's Office later confirmed what many had suspected. The family had never been directly in the wildfire's path. The fire, fanned by shifting winds, had burned through ridges miles away. But from a canyon floor, the smoke had been enough to make visibility drop to nearly zero. In that gray, choking haze, even experienced hikers could lose their bearings. What followed, 2 nights of disorientation, dehydration, and fear, was a kind of survival story that could have easily ended differently. Search and rescue officers admitted privately that they hadn't expected to find all 5 alive. The combination of fire, terrain, and dropping nighttime temperatures was a brutal equation, but luck and timing had been on their side. For a few days, the Cowserts became reluctant local celebrities. Their story was replayed across the Weather Channel and national outlets, framed as a near tragedy with a happy ending. But those who had been part of the search, the firefighters who watched wind maps shift every hour, the volunteers who combed dry creek beds until their voices cracked, knew how fine the margin truly was. Experts interviewed afterward pointed out a recurring theme in wilderness rescues: complacency. Many hikers underestimate how quickly conditions can turn. One survival instructor noted, "People assume the wilderness is neutral. It's not. It doesn't mean harm, but it also doesn't care. You make one wrong call, and the margin for error vanishes." By the end of the week, the Perry Canyon fire had been fully contained. The ridgeline that had burned so brightly days earlier now lay in shades of gray and brown, blackened trees, charred rock, and silence. The same helicopters that once scanned the slopes for signs of life now flew over empty terrain. Back at home, the Cowser children returned to normal routines: school, friends, sleepovers, while their parents avoided interviews and quietly donated to the local search and rescue fund. They never went camping that summer again. In the following months, the story slipped from national headlines, as survival tales often do. But in Perry, the memory lingered, not just the fire or the fear, but a fragile balance between life and loss. As the sun rose one last time over the canyon, the burned ridgeline caught the light, glowing faintly gold through the smoke's lingering haze. From a distance, it looked peaceful again, like nothing had ever gone wrong. But those who were there remembered the truth. Sometimes the difference between a missing persons case and a miracle of survival is only a few hours, a single decision, or one lucky break. And as the canyon returned to silence, one thought remained: the forest doesn't hunt, but it doesn't save either.